Hey guys, welcome back to Intuitive Angling, and appreciate you guys coming by the channel to check out today's video. You guys, I admit I was wrong about something in bass fishing. I figured out I was wrong about this about 20 years ago, and it's sort of like a belief that I'd had for 30 years prior to that. And I'm going to explain to you guys how I came to this realization and how it's really helped me catch a lot more bass, pretty much since I acknowledged it. So we're going to get into that in today's video. Also, guys, before you start out, thank you very much for everybody that has been supporting Intuitive Angling by hitting that subscribe button. Much appreciated there, guys. Also, quick reminder, we do have channel memberships here at Intuitive Angling. Channel members get free videos every week that are private, that are not seen by the public. And then also you get my email address for your fishing questions. So if you're interested, just go to the my YouTube homepage and hit the join button for information. And again, thank you for everybody that's been using all the links I put in every video description. Really appreciate that. I do appreciate you guys putting up those plugs, guys. I know it's irritating to me when I watch other YouTube channels, but one thing about that is I've gotten to the point now where I know these plugs that you hear on YouTube videos, how important they are to keep a channel on. So thank you very much for just putting up and supporting the channel through them, because that's just part of YouTube anyway. Okay, here's what I was wrong about. Here's what I learned about bass fishing. I'm going to explain to you guys how to benefit. I was wrong when I had this perception or this belief that bass turned off and got harder to catch after a cold front. I had this belief for years because for a lot of it, it was my experience. I would have good days, before a cold front rolled in, and then I'd have bad days after they didn't. And I just thought, my belief was that when a cold front went through, and like today, you got bluebird skies. Like right now, it's super windy. It's a bluebird skies. The wind turned around from the south to the north yesterday. Bad cold front, and I experienced a lot of difficult fishing after that. Let me give you one prime example that really formed my belief on this, that took me a long time to realize I was wrong about. I was fishing a tournament down at Bassmaster. It was my first year on the circuit. Bassmaster Invitational at Sam Rayburn Lake. First time I'd ever been on Sam Rayburn. And guys, I had a practice down there at Sam Rayburn. It was the last day of practice. And it was a warm, late March day. Water temperature was probably, upper 50s, around 60 degrees. Water was up, flooded in the bushes. And this day that I had that day, I'll never forget it. I was taking a floating lizard, and I was throwing it around these flooded bushes, these clear water bushes. And guys, I must have had 50, I'm talking 50 bass over 4 pounds that would swim up out of those bushes in that clear water and grab that lizard and swim away with it. And then I had my hook cut off, so I just shook them off. I could not believe it. It's like I went back to the room I was staying with, rooming with the guys, and I didn't say anything except to this one friend of mine. I told him what I was doing. I said, dude, I have never seen anything like this. I said, I'm going to win this tournament. I said, the only thing in my mind is, how am I going to win it by 10 pounds, 20 pounds, or 30 pounds? I've never seen anything like this. And the next morning of the tournament, of course, a cold front rolls through. And with the day before, it had been warm and calm, muggy, that type of thing. And the day that cold front rolled in, that morning when we took out, or when I launched my boat, the wind had switched around to the north, and it was blowing 25 miles an hour, and the temperature dropped about 20 degrees. I went out there with the floating lizard, and, just like I'd done the day before, and never had a bite on it. I went from shaking off, 40 or 50 bass over 4 pounds to not even having a bite. And after that was such a profound experience. I just theorized that, that just turned the bass off. That's what they do in cold fronts. Not true. I started noticing a pattern. Even like in that tournament at Rayburn, somebody still caught them. And I noticed this over and over and over again. And so many times I would get on something good in practice, and then a cold front would roll through and I'd fall on my butt. And I just thought that the fish quit biting. It's only when I started really digging into this and talking to some people after fronts rolled through that I realized that it's not the cold front that turns the bass off. That's not the truth. The bass are still there, they're still biting, they're still active. You just have to change your approach with it. And the approach that you have to change, and this is what I learned about it, is it's not just like cut and dry, this is what you do before front, this is what you do after front. How a bass behaves and how it bites and how its level of aggressiveness or mood and personalities are after front, it depends on the severity of the front. Because here's the thing, it's like you've got a lot of different type of weather systems that come in, frontal systems. Some fronts, like today, it's like here in Missouri, it's like yesterday when I woke up, it was like 65 degrees, almost January, and warm. We had a south wind, probably 10 miles an hour, and by 11 o'clock or so, that front rolled in, and it just completely turned it around. Temperature dropped 30 degrees, wind switched 180 degrees, cold, bright bluebird skies. That's the worst frontal situation. Then you also have different frontal situations where, say, a front passes through and you have a very minor temperature drop or temperature change, and you may have a wind switch, but the wind switch is a light wind and you still may have overcast after the front rolls through. So some fronts like that can actually maybe help things out a little bit with putting some cloud cover in the atmosphere. So regardless, however severe this front is or how not severe it is, it requires a different adjustment in the technique. And for conversation standpoint, I don't want to go over every single weather pattern. I want to talk about today this type of front, the big nasty cold front where everything turns around and switches. What do the bass do? Okay, you've got two options that occur after something like this happens. A lot of it has to do with the wind speed, because sometimes after a real bad cold front, you have a strong north wind like we do right now. And sometimes after a bad cold front, you have a north wind, but it's a light breeze. The wind velocity after a cold front comes through, if you've had a big temperature drop, dictates the technique that you're going to have to adjust to keep catching bass after this front. It's not that the bass stop biting, you just have to adjust the technique. Here's the thing that you need to remember. If you keep your wind, say for example, you've had a strong south wind before the front, you got a strong north wind after the front. If you have your wind the day after a front, you can still catch these fish, and you have to catch them with a reaction bait. And this reaction bait is going to trigger the strike more than anything else. Now, probably my number one after a front comes through is like a lipless crankbait, like a rattle trap, something like that. That is like the ultimate reaction bait. It's loud, it's noisy, it's aggressive. You can reel it fast through the water column, and this is the thing that triggers those post-spawn fish. So let's say, for example, before the front roll through, you were catching them slow rolling a spinnerbait, or something like that. After the front rolls through, you may have to pick that reaction bait up and put down that slow rolled spinnerbait and burn a rattle trap to try to get that instinctual reaction strike. Now, as the wind dissipates, let's say, for example, you have that front roll through where, bright skies out, not much wind. In a situation like that, it's very difficult to trigger a bass from a reaction bite, and you have to finesse them out on the bottom. That's why after a front rolls through, if you do not have much wind, your baits like your shaky heads, your Ned rigs, your jigs on the bottom, any type of a bottom type lure with some type of a jig head on it is going to work really good, because those fish do not want to get away from cover. They don't want to ambush targets. They want to just, if something crawls by their nose, yeah, they'll run up to it and just suck it in like that. But they're not going to come up and hit that rattle trap 5 feet over their head if it's bright with not much wind activity on the surface. That's just what I have found that they've done. So that's the most important thing to remember. Let's say, again, before that front rolled through, you were catching them on a top water or maybe a swim bait or something like that. And then after that front rolls through and they don't want to come up on the top water of the swim baits, you got to slow down with some type of of a finesse approach if there's no wind. So you got to just realize that bass are not victims of their environment. They're not like, they don't just like roll over and play dead just because a cold front, rolls through. They are opportunistic feeders, and they have evolved over millions of years to feed and expel and exert energy only under ideal situations. And the wind that is created after a bad front is it makes them feel more secure. The wind always makes bass feel more secure and more willing to leave their ambush places and chase lures. But after that wind dies down, you have more light intensity in the water. They've evolved to know that they expose themselves too much by doing that, and therefore they just want to pick something up close and not get away from that cover. So biggest thing I learned, guys, is that it is a myth that bass turn off after a cold front. You simply have to readjust your techniques and those type of things. One more thing that'll help you guys out after a cold front is always try to move to the thickest cover, because bass love to be around thicker cover regardless if it's a reaction bait or slow bait after a frontal passage. Thick grass, lily pads, reeds, underneath a boat dock, brush piles, something like that. They love to be around cover after a front. So anyway, guys, hope it helps out. We'll talk later.